Before anger, there's pain. Before performance, there's silence. Before a man repeats what he's heard, he remembers what he didn't get to say, what he swallowed, what was ridiculed, dismissed, or left unanswered. If the Manosphere is a loud place, it's because it was built atop a quiet one, a silence so familiar, most don't even notice it anymore. This segment is about that silence, not just the absence of noise, but the absence of permission to feel, to speak, to question. It's about the broken mirror, the one men are handed early, not to reflect who they are, but to show them who they must never be. And when that mirror cracks, they don't get a new one. They're just told to act like nothing shattered. Here's how it usually begins. A boy skins his knee and cries, and hears, "Stop crying like a girl." He hesitates to throw a punch and hears, "Don't be soft." He watches the men in his life, silent, stern, untouchable. No one says, "Be fake," but everything says, "Don't be real." Shame doesn't always arrive with violence. Sometimes it arrives in laughter, in the joke that lands like a jab, in the quiet exclusion from the group, in the way affection is rationed, only given when you win, when you achieve, when you conform. It's not one big wound. It's 1,000 small ones, each one teaching you not to bleed in public. One of the earliest rules of masculinity is this: you're not allowed to be unsure. You must project certainty, even if you have no idea what you're doing. You're expected to lead, to fix, to conquer, to perform, without being taught how. You fail, you fall behind, you hesitate, and the world shrugs, as if the instruction manual was supposed to be genetic. This is where the fracture begins, between what you feel and what you're allowed to admit, between the questions that live inside you and the answers you're forced to pretend you already have. So, you fake it. You imitate confidence. You swallow the doubt. And somewhere along the way, you start mistaking the mask for your own face. Then, the culture shifts. You're told to be softer now, to be open, empathic, emotionally fluent, to listen, to unlearn. But no one rewinds the tape. No one acknowledges the years spent unlearning yourself. You're not invited to heal. You're expected to adapt, to perform a new masculinity, just as performatively as the old one. This is where resentment festers, not because you oppose growth, but because it feels like you're being punished for playing the game you were told to win. Now the rules have changed, but no one told you how, and you're being graded by people who never learned the old ones. So you stop trying to keep up and start looking for someone who'll say, "You are right all along." That's where the Manosphere enters, not as ideology, but as explanation. It tells you you're not broken, you've been betrayed, that you don't need to grow, you need to reclaim, that you were never the problem, they were. And in a world where shame has no name, blame feels like relief. Because deep down, you already knew something wasn't working. The relationships, the expectations, the silence. You didn't have language for it, only frustration, only the ache. And when someone finally puts that ache into words, even if they twist it, it still feels like being understood. But here's the catch. Instead of offering space to explore your pain, the Manosphere redirects it, weaponizes it. Vulnerability is reframed as weakness, reflection as weakness, compassion as betrayal. And suddenly, your inner life is not a place to visit, but a place to lock down. So you speak with confidence. You move with certainty. You post the takes that get applause. And yet, underneath it all, a question lingers. Am I enough? That's the real wound. It's not healed by dominance. It's only numbed by it. And so men perform. Every day. Confidence, desirability, control. Roles rehearsed so often, they stop feeling like roles. But the cost is exhaustion. And the deeper cost is this: no one sees you, because the you they see was never yours to begin with. The damage isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it shows up in distance, in the way you check out of relationships, in the jokes you don't really believe, in the habits that keep you isolated even when you're surrounded. You're not angry all the time. You're just never really home. So let's stop here. Not to fix, just to notice. What did you bury to survive? What part of you went silent first? What version of manhood did you try to build? And what did it cost? Because behind every persona, there's a story. And behind every story, there's a boy who was told to disappear. Let's talk about anger. Not the loud kind, the slow kind. The kind that builds when something inside you goes unacknowledged for too long. When you're not allowed to hurt, anger becomes the only emotion that feels like power. Because sadness gets you mocked, fear gets you ignored, but anger gets you noticed. The Manosphere doesn't create that anger. It collects it, refines it, distills it into content, identity, currency. It says, your rage is righteous. It gives it direction towards women, society, simps, feminists, and softness. It gives you an enemy, and sometimes having an enemy feels better than feeling alone. But let's be honest, some of the anger is justified. There is confusion in modern masculinity. There is pressure. There is shame in not measuring up to shifting ideals. The pain is real. The betrayal is real. But when pain isn't processed, it calcifies. And what could have been grief becomes grievance. That's how trauma becomes dogma. That's how personal stories turn into universal rules. You can't trust women. Nice guys finish last. Only power earns respect. And the more you repeat those rules, the more they become self-fulfilling. You're not reacting to the world. You're reliving a wound. Here's where it gets tragic. Most of the men drawn into the Manosphere aren't looking for power. They're looking for permission to feel, to speak, to stop pretending. But they've learned that softness costs too much. So they trade connection for control. They trade honesty for status. And they call it strength. The mirror shatters again. Because every time you silence yourself to be accepted, every time you play a part that isn't yours, you fracture a little further. And eventually, you don't recognize your own reflection. You only see the performance, the persona, the mask. And masks, over time, become skin. They harden. They shape your voice, your posture, your worldview. You forget how to speak without them. You stop asking questions, because questions are dangerous. They make you vulnerable. And the Manosphere has no room for vulnerability, unless it's followed by vengeance. But sometimes a crack forms, a moment of doubt, a failed relationship, a moment of quiet where the content doesn't comfort you anymore. And in that space, if you're lucky, you start to wonder, is this really who I want to be? Some men leave the Manosphere, quietly. There's no exit ritual, no celebration, no welcome party on the other side. Just silence, again. Only this time is the silence of not knowing what comes next, of not having a map, of having to build one from scratch. But leaving doesn't mean rejecting everything. It means separating the real from the reactive, the valid questions from the violent answers. It means asking, what am I angry for? Not just what I'm angry at. Because beneath every generalized hatred, there's usually a specific heartbreak. And heartbreak can become a teacher, not a dictator, not a destroyer, but a teacher. If you let it, if you sit with it long enough to hear what it's saying, before someone else tells you what to scream. This is the quiet revolution, not men rising to reclaim power, but men stepping out of scripts to reclaim their humanity. Not louder, not meaner, just more whole. It won't go viral, but it might save your life. Here's the truth that rarely gets said. You're allowed to be confused. You're allowed to be soft. You're allowed to not have it figured out. Being a man was never supposed to mean being a statue. You were supposed to move, to change, to grow. So if something in you feels tired, tired of performing, tired of pretending, tired of carrying pain that was never yours to hold, that's not weakness, that's wisdom. That's the first step out of the echo chamber and into something real. In the next segment, we'll turn to the digital machinery behind it all, the algorithms, the platforms, the incentives that don't just reflect male pain, but amplify, weaponize, and monetize it. But for now, pause. Ask yourself, when did you stop being allowed to feel? And who benefits when you forget how?